The book of Habakkuk talks about two types of nations. Nations that are called by God to be godly and have failed, and nations that are completely pagan and ungodly. Now, have you ever wondered to yourself, you know, as Americans, we look at this and we say, well, okay, we're the good guys, and China, Russia, North Korea, they're the bad guys, right? Isn't that kind of the way that we think? Well, what would happen if not only are they the bad guys, but we might be the bad guys as well? If you look at any history of various nations, one of the ones that stands out is the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire didn't dissolve, didn't end so much because of external conflict and wars and attacks by enemies. Most of what happened to the Roman Empire was internal decay, that their moral fiber fell apart. That has happened in other nations as well, and I don't mean to discourage you or disappoint you, but we might be on that same road. And so we need the advice of Habakkuk. I've said that he's a prophet for our times, for the questions of our times. And we looked in chapter 1 at Habakkuk's questions and complaints before God. Like I said, most of the minor prophets are addressing other tribes, other nations, other individuals, other systems. But Habakkuk is having a dialogue with the living God and saying, why is this happening to our nation? So it's very relevant for our day and age. And in chapter 2, we started to look at the Lord's answer to Habakkuk's complaint. And it wasn't the answer that Habakkuk wanted. The answer was, I am going to take the Babylonians and bring them to conquer and to judge my nation of Judah and Israel there around Jerusalem. So in this, God pronounces the 5 woes against Babylon. And we're going to look at chapter 2, verses 5 through 20 today, that God is saying, yes, I'm going to use Babylon and the Babylonian captivity to judge my nation. However, I'm not going to hold them harmless because they are indeed an evil and gross nation. Now, if I were to look for Babylon today, where would I find it? What country? Modern day country of Iraq, okay? And Iraq and Iran are in the news constantly. So this is as new as the nightly news. And so the first thing he says is, in these 5 woes, woe to him who increases what is not his. He's talking about the Babylonians coming and taking things by force. I'm going to go through all of them, and then we're going to look at them in a little detail. Woe to him who covets evil gain. So nations. Now, put ourselves into this. And you might say, well, okay, this applies to North Korea, this applies to Russia, this applies to China. But ask yourself these questions about some of the way the United States operates. Now, I have to say, the United States has sent out more missionaries than any other country in the world. Great Britain might be a close second. And the United States has given and raised the standard of living and helped peoples around the world more than any other country in history. And I think that's one of the reasons that God's blessing has been upon it. But that's no guarantee, depending upon how we do things and how we behave, that's no guarantee that that will continue. And so these 5 woes against Babylon can also apply to our country, other countries internally. Woe to him who covets evil gain. Woe to him who builds a town with evil. Woe to him who gives his neighbor drink. And there's a specific reason for this. But you could take any one of those. Woe to him who increases what is not his. Nothing wrong with businesses making a profit. But if they make a profit on the backs of others, if they make a profit illegally. This is something that God takes notice of. Woe to him who covets evil gain. That if you get your gain, if a nation gets its gain by evil means, woe to him who builds a town with evil. If there's corruption in our government and in other governments, then God takes notice. And this one, woe to him who gives his neighbor drink. We are at an epidemic, and I'm not talking just about alcohol, we are at an epidemic for drug overdose, drug addiction, all kinds of problems. And we just keep passing laws that continue to, legalize some things that I wonder whether they should be legalized or not. I wonder where it's going to lead us 10, 20 years from now. And God takes notice of all this. Woe to him who speaks to idols. We start to worship the wrong things. We worship our money. We worship our education. We worship our status. We tend to worship. How much time do our young people spend on social media? I mean, it is amazing to me. It's amazing to me how much time I do, and I don't participate very much in social media. But it's become the new idolatry. Not only that, the video games. They have become the new norm, the new, well, Terry, you're just taking the fun out of things, They forget the times when you used to play with sticks and bicycles and things like that, and that occupied your time as a kid. Let us have our fun. Yeah, but there's something more addictive about all of this, and it becomes a replacement and a displacement for what should be in life. Our education values are going down. Our children are not as educated as they used to be. So with this in mind, what Babylon would call this, or what a nation, an evil nation would call this, would be, in quotes, success. We have success. And so I want you to kind of plug this in to our world settings and our nations, because this is what God is doing with Babylon. He's basically saying you have claimed your success, quote, by stealing. Woe to him who increases what is not his. Here's the passage in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 5. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant, talking about the nation of Babylon, and never at rest. Because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. Never enough. Success by stealing. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captives all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. So God is looking and saying, any nation that does that, any business that does that, any system of government that does that. And then the question is, how long must this go on? And God will deal with it. So here's Babylon, who basically obtained their success by stealing, by pushing down on others. And so God pronounces a judgment and a woe. Now, it's not going to happen right away. Israel's going to go into 70 years of captivity, and eventually it's going to happen when the Medo-Persians come and defeat Babylon. But do you remember how this worked? 722 BC, the Assyrians came, scattered those 10 tribes in the northern part of Israel. That was God's judgment on the north. And then the Babylonians came, displaced the Assyrians. They became the world power, and they took those 2 tribes down around Jerusalem and took Ezekiel and Daniel and others captive. And they were the successful nation at the time. They would later be displaced by the Medo-Persians. And then who displaced the Medo-Persians in your history? Anybody know? The Greeks, right, okay? And who displaced the Greeks? The Romans, okay? And so you see those, and Daniel talks really about that in his image in the book of Daniel. And remember, Daniel was spending 70 years in captivity in Babylon, so he knew the place and the system well. So success by stealing. Go on to verse 7. Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Well, is that a scary thought? What would happen today in the United States if our creditors suddenly arose? Okay? I'm looking forward to getting my house paid off and being out of debt. I only have a few years to be able to do that. And it's a goal that we've really been working on. And then I realize that I am going to, even if I am as a person debt-free, I am going to be with the national debt, indebted up to my ears for as long as I live on this earth. And every child born on this earth has a tag of debt on them. Will not your creditors suddenly arise? How much money do we owe China? I'm not trying to be political here, but we got to look at the reality of the things. How tied are we to other nations? And it is the thing that has spelled the downfall of previous nations. Why will it not spell the downfall of our nation? And that's the direction that we're headed. I don't mean to be morbid, but we can't go on with this glossy thought that, America is just on the verge of wonderfulness. We're not. We have to reverse some trends. We've got to go back to some solid policies and honoring God before God can, really bless us in the way He wants. Now, please don't misunderstand. I think we are still the most blessed nation on earth with the most freedoms. I can't imagine another place to live. I look at the immigration problem and I say to myself, why are these people not rushing to get into China? Why are they not rushing to get into Russia? Why are they not rushing to get into North Korea or Venezuela? Why are they not doing this? Why are they rushing to come into our country? Because they still believe that we are a fantastic country with opportunities. Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. That's the danger. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. That's the pattern of the Babylonians. That's the pattern of world conquerors all the way down the line. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn? Verse 6 saying, I want you to see the construction here. Bible Knowledge Commentary says the NIV's rendering, will not all of them taunt him, is literally, will not all of them take up a taunt song? So what, in a lot of ways, Habakkuk is more like the Psalms. It's more like poetry. And what's happening is he says when they do these woes, it's like a song of woe. It's like a dirge. The song, a mashkal, is any form of poetic composition in which parallelism is the principle of construction. You can't see that in the English, but it's there in the Hebrew. It may denote a parable, a proverb, an ode, or a dirge, such as the doleful lamentation recorded here. So this is like Jeremiah's lamentation, which was written, just a short book written when Jeremiah was watching the city of Jerusalem burn and be destroyed, being taken captive by the Babylonians. Or some of the psalmists when they wrote a song of sorrow. So that's what this is, this set of woes. It's a taunt song. It's taunting Babylon, and God is taunting Babylon through Habakkuk and his writings. Secondly, success, quote, by destroying. These are all wrong ways to have success. I want you to underscore that. Woe to him who covets evil gain, verses 9 through 11. Verse 9, woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. This is what the Babylonians did by defeating others. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Do you get the impression that God is God and God is righteous, and he says, well, regardless of what you do, if you want to claim real success, don't do it by stealing, don't do it by destroying, don't do it by dishonesty, do it by God's principles. And you know what? If that's the principle for individual Christians, and it can flow to a nation, and that's what this nation did, incidentally. That's what the United States did in the early days. And you can say, well, we've got a terrible history of abuse and slavery and every other thing. And yes, we do. George Washington was a slave owner. There's no denying that. But the point is, not only did they do that, but guys like Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant and the abolitionist movement worked so hard to make an impact and to give freedom. I won't tell you which political party suppressed those freedoms. Go check your history out, and you'll find out which political party suppressed those freedoms, wanted to return to some of the practices that were in the South. And so we have come a long way. Are we there yet? Are we perfect? No. But you don't get success in a nation by stealing or destroying. And the Babylonians can't do that. We can't do that. Communist China cannot do that. Ultimately, God will deal with it. North Korea cannot do that. Russia cannot do that. That's not true success. Number 3, success by injustice. Woe to him who builds a town with evil. Third woe, verse 12. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire? That the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? Now I want you to see this. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. Do you know what that tells me? That tells me that Iran, Iraq, China, Russia, North Korea, if they are nations at that time in the future, along with the U.S., if we're a nation at that time in the future, will celebrate the knowledge of the glory of God, because it will cover the whole earth. And whoever is in charge in any one of these nations will bow their knee to the living God and the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the promise that's there. So God is saying, give up success by injustice. Give up success by stealing. Give up all these false things that you think and you believe, because ultimately, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God. So if you're living that way, you're on the right track, and you're going to see this and rejoice. There's not going to be a nation on the earth, at least until the end of the 1,000 years, that rebels against Jesus Christ and his kingdom. Not Iraq, not Iran, not any of them. But we have nations that believe by social injustice. We have nations that believe by stealing. We have nations that believe by oppression. And we have people in positive nations like the United States who believe that same kind of oppression can serve as success. And it simply will not. Number 4, success by addiction. This is a nightmare for our country. Woe to him who gives his neighbor drink. Now, I explained this last week because the Babylonians were notorious drunkards. They had a reputation. If you look at Daniel and the handwriting on the wall, that story in the book of Daniel, what were they doing? They're having a drunken party. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a drink. I am saying that anything that addicts you is not success. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk. This is a purposeful thing. You know, you could take that, and I hate to say it, but woe to the pharmaceutical companies that are just allowing all kinds of things to be pumped into our environment, pumped into our settings. Woe to the drug cartels that are sending fentanyl and other things across our border, opioids, where people are getting addicted. That's the same thing as giving drink to your neighbor, only it's even worse. So that he can gaze on their naked bodies, you will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. All I'm saying is that God is the great equalizer, and it's going to even out in the end. And so people who think that success by addiction, success by trafficking, success by any of the means where people are getting money in our world or around the world, success by being an NBA star and kowtowing to China, I'm going to tell you. You know, you're like, Terry, please don't preach politics. This is our world. This is what we live in. Thank God for those who stand up and say, you know what? Why should we send these royalties? Why should we feed into all of this, which is corruption, when you have people like North Korea and China and others that are oppressing and putting other innocent people to death? Where's the Christian community standing up about this? And you're like, well, it's just me, I can't do much. I don't know. When's the last time you bought a pair of Nike? I'll probably get blocked on YouTube for this one, but when's the last time you bought a pair of Nike sneakers? And then ask yourself, why'd you do it? Right? Well, I liked them, they were fashionable. You know, buy from some company that's not in bed with China. You know, I'm sorry to be so, like, not spiritual, but that's the reality of the thing. God said it 2,600 years ago, and all I'm doing is applying it to our day. And then an interlude comes in these 5 woes that God talks about, the dangers of a violent society. Wow. Do we have a violent society? Whew. The stuff, all you gotta do is turn on the news, and the stuff that you see. I saw a man in a video punch a young woman in the face after a discussion on a subway. Why? Whatever happened to chivalry? Whatever happened to being a gentleman? And whatever happened to people stepping in on stuff like that? I know you're afraid you're going to get punched yourself. Verse 17, the violence you have done to Lebanon, Lebanon was a nearby country, you know where Lebanon is, will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. This is a situation, and we're not talking about hunters and hunting because that's a legitimate sport if it's not abused, but these are people who would just go in. Not only would they kill people, they would slaughter animals, they would do all kinds of heinous things. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. So when you see a violent society, that tells you that society is falling apart. When you see a society that doesn't have law and order and doesn't have consequences for crime, you better see the warning signs that that's a problem. And Habakkuk talked about it with Babylon 2,600 years ago, and we're living it today. We're living it today. Every day in our cities, on our subways, with riots, with all kinds of violent situations. Bible Knowledge Commentary, the reason for Babylon's abject shame was her violence done to Lebanon. Lebanon, a nation north of Israel, was known for its abundance of cedar trees and wild animals. It had suffered the ruthless removal of timber for Babylonian buildings and the destructive slaughter of beasts that live in the forest. What happened is Babylon came in, they needed buildings to build, and they just stripped. And if you know anything about Lebanon or Israel, there's not that many trees there anyway. It's not super abundant, but Lebanon was a little more lush up there. The violence done to the forest would weigh on Babylon, and its senseless hunting and killing of the fauna would terrify it. So that was their sense of operating, just violent, just go in and destroy, just destroy. You see looting on the news, and nothing is, you see buildings burned down, and nothing is done. Tell me we're not a violent nation. You say, well, I'm not a violent person, I'm a peaceful person. You might be, but we sure live in a violent nation. Number 5, the last one, success by ignoring God. And this is the crux of the matter. This is the whole heart of the matter. Woe to him who speaks to idols, chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. Habakkuk writes, of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. So here's what he's saying. You take a piece of stone or you take a piece of wood and you carve it and you say, okay, that's where I'm putting my trust. That's where I'm putting my faith. And you know, you and I don't do that. In fact, Israel, after they came back from the Babylonian captivity, never did that again in terms of carved animals. But you know what we do? We make substitutes. Tell me we're not an idolatrous nation with the things that we worship. And you could go down the list. And they are all idolatry. They are all, what are we trying to do? God, we're uncomfortable with you. Let's put anything in your place. Let's not worry about worshiping on Sunday morning. You're the good guys because you're here. Let's not worry about a spiritual dynamic in our life. Let's not worry about raising our kids with spiritual values, because we did this from the 50s on. Let's give them cars and houses and refrigerators. And I'm not against any of that stuff, but that's where all of our energy went. The Bible says, Jesus said in the New Testament, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. You notice he didn't say it the other way. He didn't say where your heart is, there your treasure will be. Do you know why? He says because our treasures, our things, control us. They demonstrate our hearts. So you tell me what you believe in, you tell me where your heart is, and then tell me where you spend your time, your energy, your money. And like I've said before, I have lots of hobbies. I love hobbies. I love leisure and recreational and free time. But where you put your treasure, where you put your investment, where you put your energy, your time, God knows that's where your heart is. And we live in a society that has said, let's push God aside, and we only need him if there's a crisis. We only need him if things are falling apart. We only need him if we get into a bind. What value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Even Paul in the New Testament says this is the dumbest thing on the planet. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life. You gotta laugh, you know. Let's take that 2x4 that you carved into an idol and say, hey, you know, talk to me. I need some conversation here. Or to a lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? Oh, well, we'll fix it up. We'll make it better. We'll cover it with gold. It'll be more lifelike. Is it covered with gold and silver? Still no breath in it. And yet we worship things that can't help us like God can. I want to suggest to you that this is what our world has always needed and needs today, and it's the closer in Habakkuk chapter 2. Here's what he says. After all these woes, after all these attempts to have success through false means, he says, Habakkuk, I want you to stop and I want you to think. Because the Lord is still in his holy temple. Therefore, the whole earth needs to be silent before him. We need to pause and recognize who God is. And if we don't recognize who God is in our schools and in our government and in our communities, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Bible Knowledge Commentary says, for Habakkuk, the message was clear. Stop complaining and stop doubting. God is not indifferent to sin. He's not insensitive to suffering. The Lord is neither inactive nor impervious. He is still in control. In his perfect time, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, will accomplish his divine purpose. Habakkuk was to stand in humble silence and hushed expectancy of God's intervention. Now, Habakkuk prayed for God's intervention. But God said it's not going to happen for another 70 years because I have a different plan. You need to be praying, not only for the United States of America, but for all the countries around the world and all of their leaders, that they would turn to God. And it might not happen in our lifetime. In fact, I'll give you a scenario. It might be that we will continue to be so indebted to China, and that one day China will overtake a weakened nation, and that might be part of God's plan. And you say, well, how could God do that? You know, we're the good guys. But if we're not going to be the good guys, this is what he did to the apple of his eye, to Judah. The children that he loved, that were to be an example nation down there in Jerusalem. And he wasn't above removing them and letting that area lay dormant for 70 years. And even then, when they came back, it was just a straggling of things. When you open the chapters of the New Testament, yes, Israel's there, but it's under the control of the Roman government. It has high taxes and very little freedom. It's not beyond imagination that this will happen to us. Do you know what's going to make the difference? Counting on success in the right ways, in the honest ways. And you can't get your government to do that. And you can't get your businesses to do that. But you can do that. And I think that's the backbone. Christians everywhere praying, living their lives for Jesus Christ. And I think that's the backbone of what's holding this nation together right now. Don't know how many years that's going to last. I'm going to close with Psalm 46 because it's very similar to Habakkuk. Come and see what the Lord has done. The desolations he has brought on the earth. God's judged it, dealt with it. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. Wouldn't you like that? He breaks the bow and shatters the spear, and he burns the shields with fire. No more war. No more conflict. And he says, be still, as a person, as a nation, and know that I am God. And I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. It's going to happen. I tell you week after week, it's going to happen. Do we have to weather a storm first? Probably. So get on your knees and pray for all the nations of the earth. Pray for all the missions that are going on. Pray for your government. Pray for the sometimes stupid and sometimes smart and wise decisions that are being made out of Washington. But don't give up. Be silent before the Lord because he sees every one of those decisions.